And the sound of the clapperboard means that it's the start of Livestream Insiders, episode 166. On today's programme, it's all change in the live stream space. Yeah, we've got a few examples of how things are changing as regards those trivia games that we've heard about in the past. Some really interesting developments. Plus, we've got a couple of case studies, one from a town hall where a mayoral candidate or a mayor was speaking and how they have used Facebook Live. Also, Facebook Live for really local city-wide news programs, which is a really interesting experiment. Well, I say experiment, it's been going on for several years, but it's a really interesting case study from Scotland. And also Twitch. We mentioned last week about how the different categories are changing. So it's not just gaming, but what are the most popular categories to get into if you're live streaming on Twitch? We'll bring you all that information over the next 30 minutes. First of all, hello, I'm Peter Stewart, my co-host, Krishna Day.
Thank you, everybody, for being with us here live, or if you're watching us on the replay. As Peter's already outlined, we love sharing case studies and examples and best practice tips. That's our passion about how we can help you in terms of integrate live streaming, that could be live audio or live video, into your communications. That might be for marketing, could be for social selling, internal communications, it could be for recruitment, or even for customer service in terms of handling issues. Should I even say crises? Because I know that's sometimes what we have to deal with. I know that lots of people who join us here live and also for the replay are very experienced in live streaming. That's why we like to look at both what's happening in terms of new news, but also why we like to bring you case studies that if you're just getting started or trying to build a case for actually using live streaming, then these examples that we give you in the show, and I'm coming to them a little bit later on, I think will be of assistance. I'm going to pass it straight back to Peter, but do put your comments into the chat and we'll do our best to answer them in real time, or in fact, if you put them in later on, wherever you see this, so you could be watching this as a replay over on YouTube or on Vimeo, or you might even be listening to this as a podcast or watching it on Facebook. We will do our best to come back to any questions that you have for us.
Okay, thank you, Krishna. So here's a question for you. How many trivia/game shows which are being live streamed can you name? Okay, here we go. Well, there's HQ Trivia, of course, and then there's, I think there's a couple more. Can you name any more than that? There are quite a few, and I'll bring those to you over the course of the next 3 or 4 minutes here on Livestream Insiders. Of course, HQ Trivia has been going for several years, really, really popular in the US and Canada and also the UK as well. They get hundreds of thousands of views a day. Those numbers perhaps have peaked, and they do seem to be on a bit of a downward turn. But you know what? There are several others on the market as well, and they're really interesting what they're doing. So you may remember that we spoke about on the programme last summer, summer in the Northern Hemisphere, about Facebook and their trivia/game show called Confetti. I suppose because when you win big, the confetti comes down from the ceiling. It's been in the US and it's gone down well there. It's on weekdays. But you know what? What's really interesting is where else it has been. It has been in the UK, but it's going down a storm in Mexico, Thailand, the Philippines, and Vietnam. Places which you don't think of front of mind when it comes to live streaming or perhaps trivia-based live streaming game shows. So that's really unusual and really interesting. We'll come back to that in a few moments' time because perhaps you've noticed that I've made what potentially you may have spotted as a mistake but isn't, because I'm going to come back to that in a few moments. Now, there's also a really interesting development by The Q. So it's a company called The Q. Letter Q stands for question, so The Question. Launched by a live streaming company called Stream back in 2017. So this kind of goes back a year or more, 18 months or so, because what they do is they provide the back tech for companies, for publishers, for brands and businesses to launch a game show online, which is really interesting. So they put all the kit together, all the backroom stuff, all the tech, all the capabilities for you to be able to do that. And several companies have decided to do that with the Q, including News International in News UK in the UK. They have 2 daily shows, or a twice daily show, in the UK only. So that's pretty interesting. Plus, a couple of weeks ago, earlier on this year, Watch Mojo launched, and they have a collaboration where they do a weekly trivia show for the US and for Canada as well, which is really interesting. But while all that happened, remember a few moments ago, I said that HQ Trivia was going on in the UK. Well, it stopped in December. So HQ Trivia is no longer available in the UK. And if you actually go to their Twitter feed, if you go to their website, they put up an explanation for that. And that is, they've stopped, quote, in preparation for a brand new show called HQ Words. So why is the trivia game stopped in the UK? And what is HQ Words all about? I haven't seen any more information about HQ Words, but you can see how everything is kind of churning, and people are perhaps looking at new formats and deciding on new ways of doing something which has been around for a couple of years. It's all interesting stuff. Confetti, meantime, twice daily in Mexico. They say they get really fantastic engagement there. And the Q is being shown in US, Canada, and the UK. They say they can't go any further at the moment because of the different rules, regulations, and laws about, as you probably know, about game shows and trivia and chance and lottery and the amount that you can give away. So all sorts of rules and regulations in different parts of the world. So it's quite difficult to kind of work out. Anyone can play, obviously, because it's not geolocated necessarily, but they'll only pay out to people who are living in those countries. Now, I was looking into this a little bit earlier on today, and a really interesting article via digiday.com, which listed some of the key attributes to have a successful game show: an entertaining host, thank you, I'm available if necessary, but also accurate and challenging questions. You've got to pitch those questions just right, so they get increasingly more difficult, but quite difficult to work out what you know and what other people are, inverted commas, expected to know. Obviously, you've got to have solid technology, which is where some of these other companies come in, like the Q. You've got to have solid technology because, of course, you've got a huge amount of people watching at any one time. You've got to have enough money to give away. So you've got to raise that kind of money to begin with, perhaps angel investors and so on. But also consider it's not necessarily just money, maybe unique prizes, because what several companies have done is get into bed with other companies and make money that way. So different brands have paid for takeovers of some of these game shows. Because when you've got an audience of 1.5 million people, 2 million people at any one time in any particular show, there's a lot of eyes there. There's a lot of people to contact of a certain demographic. So Nike have done something where they gave away money, but also trainers / sneakers before they're available in the shops. So that was really a must-have prize to get. But also TV companies, I think it was NBC, gave away money, but also all expenses paid trip to the final of The Voice in America and that kind of thing as well. So not necessarily money, but sometimes money can't buy prizes or experiences, because as we know, the world is really keen on experiences nowadays, as opposed to money or particular, gifts. So that kind of thing. And of course, you've got to think of a studio. You've got to think of how the graphics are going to work. You've got to think about the studio lighting and all of that kind of shiny floor kind of game show idea, maybe theme tune, sound effects, etc., etc., etc. But where you win is that so long as you've got an entertaining host who can talk on their feet, It means you don't actually have to prepare a script. And also it means that the format is similar day to day to day to day, which means you don't have to have too many rehearsals either. So there are some others around. If you haven't heard of these and you want to check out the format, Majority Rules, which is developed by the people who did an anti-HQ Trivia app. So what they did initially was build an algorithm that as soon as a question was asked on HQ Trivia, it would search Google for the answer, and so you could kind of destroy HQ Trivia. Well, there was a phone call from HQ Trivia to the anti-HQ Trivia app, and they kind of came to an arrangement, let's just say that. And then the anti-HQ Trivia app came up with a new format for a game show, which is called Majority Rules, which are questions that you can't Google the answer to. Ah, that's the trick, isn't it? That's the trick. Interesting stuff. There's also another one called Fleet Wit, where you pay to play. So you've got to have an entrance fee, which of course then takes away having to have the prize money up for grabs in the first place. You don't actually have to have that. You pay to play. And another one called Gravy, which is a shopping game show. And I think I've seen this format before, but this is really intriguing. Let's see if I can explain this to you. You have a really interesting gift or gadget or must-have item, and they've got a certain number of those to sell, okay? But they're not going to tell you how many of those items they've actually got available. And the price of those items keeps dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping. So the key for you, as far as this game show goes, no questions to be answered. The key for you is, if you want this particular must-have item, then you are going to have to buy it at the lowest possible price before they run out. But you don't know when they're going to run out. So you may have to be paying over the odds, or you may get a fantastic bargain. I think I've seen that kind of thing on these shopping channels anyway, but they've actually gamified that much more. Really interesting format, really interesting concept on these platforms. It is the rise and the churn of live streaming games on various platforms. Interesting stuff. Check it out, digiday.com. And of course, we'll have all the links available after the show from Krishna, who's up next.
You made me think about a radio show. There's a radio show in the UK, BBC Radio 2, and they have a Popmaster quiz. And they kind of ask lots of questions, trivia questions about different topics in terms of music, and you can pick your category. And they're not giving away big prizes, so it's, but it gets huge response, and people love to be participating in it. Peter, I think we can take a lot of ideas from traditional channels in terms of how they're using quizzes, because that's clearly live, but it's live radio in that particular case. And I actually do always think about, I wonder if somebody's actually got a friend in the back area, kind of speaking into their phone, asking what was the name or what was the year of that particular song, but you can't hear it but kind of being spoken back out to you. So I'm guessing that they are playing fair. So it's interesting about, how do you make sure that Google or whatever search engine doesn't deliver you the answers? It's great to hear from big case studies, but what about if you are a smaller page and perhaps you're in an area where you're not so used to actually having active engagement in terms of questions on social media? Well, that might be you if you're in the situation of being in an organization such as a public sector organization. Perhaps you're a local government, and I know a lot of governments, certain local government departments, councils across the UK particularly these days, do a lot of live streaming, but that's typically with third-party organisations working it for them, and it's usually distribution of what's going on in a council meeting. It's not always interactive and engaging. And that's why I was really interested to see about a little example, and I watched it back so you don't have to. And it was from an organization in the US, and I got a heads up on this because of somebody who I know who happens to live in that area. And the city is the city of Clarksville, Tennessee. And what I'd like to do for you now is give you some things that they did, which I thought were really good examples that we could all take if you're just getting started live streaming. because whilst they do have live streaming on their site, that's for their council meetings, this was the first time they'd actually done what they called a digital town hall. And I think firstly, they did it because there was a new mayor, and this was 17 days into him being in post. So that might be something for you to look at. Is there a change that's happened in your organisation? And I don't know whether this drive has come from him or his comms team, but I thought it was really appropriate for him to do something early into his tenure in role. So that got a big tick for me. The second thing is they promoted it in advance. And so you could actually learn about it, and you also had the opportunity to post questions in advance of the live stream. The third thing was they kept it very simple. Now, I don't know if they were streaming from a mobile device or if they were using a desktop, but there was no fancy lower thirds. It was really, really simple, but it was good lighting. It was good audio. And they'd taken care in terms of what was going to be in the background. There weren't any multiple camera angles, but I thought it was a great example for a first-time live stream. And they've got about 2,000 people, followers, who are on that page. Now, I know that not lots of people might follow and like a page from a government organisation such as that, but they might be watching it. And in fact, somebody posted during the conversation that about 94 people were watching in real time, which is pretty good for their first live stream. The live stream is about 45 minutes long, and in total, when I actually reviewed it today, it's a couple of days in since it happened, they've got about 3,500 views. Then the fourth thing that they did, I thought was really good, is they had a cheat sheet, and the mayor opened up by saying, this is the first time I've done it this way, so please bear with me if I get things wrong. So a very human approach. And he actually said, I've got a cheat sheet to keep me going, because he actually said, one of the things is I'm so used to actually speaking to an audience. And so obviously he was talking into a camera lens or into a mobile phone, and it was very different for him. And so I thought it was very human in terms of that approach that he took, but actually having that set of notes that he could refer to. The next thing I thought was really interesting is that up front, he handled potential issues. Now, I think if you're a government organisation, you're likely to have people who dislike you. If you're a council, there's going to be some disgruntled citizens around. Perhaps something hasn't been handled well. And so he handled up front something that he knew that might be an issue. And for this particular one, it was they'd had some questions about what was going to happen in terms of, was this going to also have a simultaneous transcription in terms of a live transcription, because people were actually, hard of hearing, and therefore they'd like to have that. And that feature is available. We talked about it when Facebook Live first announced it back in 2017. And they've got a couple of providers who do it. So if you're in an organisation where you're probably going to be struggling for funds, then you may not have the resources to bring in some of those organisations. However, I would encourage you to think about what is it you do anyway for live town hall meetings in person, not necessarily a digital town hall as a Facebook Live or other live stream. And what do you do then? Do you actually provide some notes for people to be able to read? Do you also provide somebody who will sign it? And increasingly, there's other ways that you can look to do that. So I thought it was great that he actually handled the question right up front. The other thing that he did, and I'm going to show you here where he actually was doing this in real time, he had his team watching out for the comments. I really like the fact that he gave a shout out to the names of the people who are in his team, including the person who will handle the questions if you make a phone call into the mayor's office. And he mentioned the communications team, so it was the comms team who were working on the live stream behind the scenes. And they actually would pass him questions, so they would have, I'm not sure if they were typed out or written out, but during the course of the live stream, they were watching the questions, they were commenting in the live stream as well, but they also passed questions for him to be able to answer in real time. And so, again, making that very conversational, so different to what their normal town hall live streams would be, let's say if it was the council meeting that was being streamed on their website. And overall, if you scan through the comments, they were genuinely actually very positive. People were thanking him for actually being interactive, engaging, and sharing information. I've actually got about 7 things that if you actually know anybody from the city of Clarksville and the mayor's office, and they want to get in touch, they can have my list of 7 things I would do to actually immediately make some differences for the next time they live stream. So if you do happen to know them, point them in my direction. I'm happy to share with them those tips. But I thought it was a very good example of a first time live stream, keeping it low tech, but making sure it was interactive and serving the citizens. And people actually did appreciate it. Yes, you will get people who will not like what you're doing if you're in public service. It doesn't matter, for example, if you're in the health service or if you're in other areas of government or local government. There will, of course, be people who don't appreciate certain things that are going on in their local vicinity. But I thought that was a really good example that you can all learn from, that I can learn from as well, in terms of when I'm working with people and with my clients about how you could actually start using live streaming for public service, public kind of citizen engagement. I hope that's been of assistance to you. And you'll be able to find the link if you do want to watch it back, actually in the curation of notes that I'll be posting at the end of the show.
Excellent. Actually, Krishna, can we have that slide back up again? Because there's something I was particularly interested in. So if we can just have that back up of the mayor in his office, because what jumped out at me and what I've got a little bit envy of is the clock on it. I mean, I was listening to everything you were saying, but I love that clock. What, with a barometer and another little dial down at the bottom? I love that clock. Like is that like a mini kind of grandfather clock there? It's got a pendulum there as well, I reckon. But yeah, interesting stuff. What we try and bring you is not only a kind of antiques roadshow, but also some case studies from around the world. And Krishna's got another fantastic case study in a few moments' time from Scotland about a city-wide news programme that goes out just on live streaming. Not a 30-minute news programme, but different bits of news from different parts of the city, breaking news, which is done on live streaming. So we'll come to that in a few moments' time. First of all, let me tell you about Twitch. We talked about Twitch, didn't we, last week? It's owned by Facebook, as you know. Started off live, well, more recently anyway, certainly, it was much more of a gaming experience. It's where gamers go to live stream their esports and so on. But as we mentioned last week, it's much more than that nowadays. So when I stumbled across an article this week from media.thinknum.com, never heard of them before, but I came across it this week. I was really interested to see what they'd categorized as the most popular other genres, other categories, other tabs on Twitch. And I thought it was worth mentioning. These are the top 10 non-gaming categories by views. Some really interesting numbers here, but let's go through the categories first of all. The second most, or the most popular category after gaming, is in real life. That's the name of the category. So essentially anything goes as long as you're live streaming your real life. Category number 2, just chatting. So when people are talking to the camera and they're just having a conversation. Number 3, talk shows and podcasts. So people doing I suppose a talk show like this, but also showing their podcasts as they're recording their podcasts. Number 4, music and performance. That kind of stands to reason, self-explanatory. Number 5, always on. So the always on category, as I understand it, is 24/7 streams of popular content, licensed content on a loop, stuff like Pokemon, stuff like Doctor Who as well. Hopefully that's been properly licensed, because as you know, I work for the company that makes Doctor Who. Check that out. Number 6, creative. Okay, that's self-explanatory. Number 7, art. So that is a subcategory of creative. Number 8 is ASMR. Now, ASMR is, I've forgotten exactly what it stands for, but it's where people get an emotional, a kind of subconscious thrill out of watching and hearing people do certain things. So it's things like people who are wrapping a present very specifically. It's the folds, it's the creases, it's the cutting. There's the new phenomenon of soap cutting, I don't know whether you've seen that. So soap cutting is very, very popular. But more specifically on this channel, ASMR is when people tune in to listen to people who are talking quietly and slowly in an emotional, almost secretive way with a low voice, men and women. And this kind of gets the bristles on the back of people's necks stand up on end. So people are really interested in that. The 8th most popular category after live streaming on Twitch. Number 9, food and drink, self-explanatory. Number 10, science and tech. Interesting stats. 2017 figures that categories were having 229 million concurrent viewers average per day. So concurrent, obviously at the same time. In real life category and the creative category had 229 million concurrent viewers on average every day in 2017. In 2018, that rose by 100 million. Boy, oh boy. Certainly a challenge for YouTube, eh? Krishna.
Yeah, I don't spend enough time on Twitch, I'm afraid. I have looked at it, I've got a channel there, but I really haven't spent much time. I know lots of people are exploring it, and I know people who are food bloggers who are doing lots of shows there, and others who are taking their, as you said, their podcast shows and actually streaming it or simulcasting it as well, Peter. I think a lot more of that's going on, which I'm sure has also helped because it's so much easier for us to be able to do that. And then platforms like Be Live, which we love, and we've talked about over the years it's been around, but actually that being able for people to actually easily live stream to Twitch, and that was released late last year. So yeah, I think it's going to continue to grow and be interesting to see where that fits in. I'm not seeing too many large corporates involved in Twitch at this point in time, but I just think it's about them having the right partners, the right perhaps influencers that they connect with. Let's come back, though, to small businesses again, and for my last story for you. Now, this is something I picked up on the Facebook media blog that was posted a couple of weeks back, and it was really interesting to see that there was a case study from Scotland, Edinburgh. I actually used to live in Edinburgh when I was very, very, very young. And it's a beautiful, beautiful city and lots to be able to see. And it's interesting that it's a lot more hyper-local news that's being created from there as well. And in fact, Peter and I both know somebody who's a mobile journalist doing content in terms of hyperlocal Edinburgh news reporting. But this is a media organisation, and it's a small media channel. Now, what I want to tell you about is hold up, because at the end of what I'm going to share about, I hope to remember to tell you and give you a little insider perspective. This is my personal insider perspective about something that I noticed when I actually was reviewing this. So I read the article and I then did a little bit of a deep dive into what was going on. So Edinburgh Live is a local news organisation. Their Facebook page has got about 19,000 followers. And this story was actually published at middle of December, thereabouts. And the story actually over on the Facebook media page was all about the use of digital video, and they've actually got somebody who is the digital video strategy editor. Her name is Hilary Mitchell, and she's the person who's quoted in this article. So Hilary was in conversation with Facebook, and they were asking a number of questions, great questions like, what is it, firstly, that you're using Facebook Live for? So they actually have talked about they use it for events that are happening across Edinburgh in real time. They actually also use it to actually engage and interact with people in real time, as I was saying earlier on, in terms of the other case study we looked at today. In fact, why did they start to use it? Well, because they're called Edinburgh Live, and they wanted to give the impression that they were just that they were in fact live. And they said also one of the benefits for them, because they're a very small organisation in terms of a local news organisation, is that it's very time consuming, as Peter and I will attest to, in terms of doing recording and then doing post-production. So the fact that there actually was a piece of content that was live and just needed to have a quick run through in terms of before they actually started to film, actually they therefore save time in terms of their workflow. And for them, they actually keep their live streams to about 4 minutes in length. And they said going live is a really good way for us to showcase various things. They try to look at things that are naturally conversational, that's actually going to help build trust, because they talked in the article about obviously the issue of fake news, and they wanted to demonstrate that they were not producing fake news. And so that was one of the ways to keep it conversational, to be able to do that. They also go on camera. So as reporters, they go on camera. And that's obviously not usual from what they might have done in the past. And that means that they see the faces of the people who've actually been creating the content, and therefore building up that rapport. They've done all sorts of things in terms of, one of the pieces of content I looked at was, I've never heard of this, I don't know if you have, Peter, but actually dog cafes, where there are dogs in the cafe, and you can go along and you can have a bit of a pet and looking after the dogs. I guess you can take your own dog. There are also cat cafes. Well, I think this is the first Chihuahua cafe that has actually been set up in the UK, and they are in Edinburgh, and so they were featured on the live stream. They also did some other content with Edinburgh Cat and Dog Home, to actually try to build awareness of that. And they also look to repurpose or recycle the content and put it into articles that they're writing on their site as well. Facebook then asked them, or the person from Facebook then asked them about what's your approach in terms of using live video generally. And they say, we like to make sure that there's a strong visual contact. And whilst they say don't have animals or children on camera, they actually often do so because of the unpredictability. And the unpredictability therefore adds to more entertainment for the live streams. So that's one of the things that they've looked to do. And they said, using Facebook Live, has it paid off? And they said, actually, what they've got is a lot of positive feedback from their audience. They've actually feel that they've been able to build trust. And interestingly, they're getting requests now from local businesses and politicians asking if they can do a live stream for them. So actually people coming to them now to say, we'd love to be featured on your show, because they've obviously been growing their channel. And obviously that's another outreach for them in terms of local news. And the final area that I wanted to focus on was what questions that they actually, sorry, let me rephrase that. What tips would they give other newsrooms who are looking to actually go live? And there were solid tips and things that probably, if you've been using live streaming on Facebook, you would know to do. They said, do a test, and they said, do it on your personal Facebook page or profile. Personally, I'd set up a test page, and therefore you get all the same infrastructure as a page, because a page is different to a profile in terms of live streaming. So I'd say set up a test page, and you don't have to make it public for anybody. But that's a great idea. Also, when you're interviewing somebody, if you've got a guest on there, give them a run through, but don't actually give them too much time to rehearse, because you want it to seem natural. And they also said that actually creating digital video means that you're going to be more like a TV presenter than a reporter in the past. And therefore you need to build your confidence in terms of being on camera, because not everybody wants to do so. The final thing that in the article they talked about was about other digital video content. And I thought this was a good insight and something I absolutely agree with, which they've actually found out that food videos work better as non-live video. And that's often because it takes time, doesn't it? It's like, if you think about the Saturday kitchen shows about how to make certain things that are very popular on TV channels, they actually have got that after fine art. They've got people prepping behind the scenes to keep the creation of the recipe down to the minimal amount of time. And in fact, Hilary, who we were talking about before in terms of being the digital video editor, used to work for BuzzFeed. And she said, I actually was trained on viral video training. So that's interesting that BuzzFeed give viral video training. And actually they use that insight and that knowledge in terms of when they're working with local cafes and restaurants, that actually when they're doing food videos and creating unusual dishes. And they actually had a video about bacon-covered waffles, which ended up with, remember how big this page is, it's only now 19,000 people on the page who are following it. 500,000 views, 500,000 views, because it was bacon-covered waffles. And the page at the time only had 2,000 likes. So get the right content, you can get the views. And now I don't know if any of that was also advertising spend behind it. It may well have done to actually prompt it in the first place. But I can imagine bacons and waffles, that's a favourite for lots and lots of people. I have to say I don't like bacon, but I know lots and lots of people do so. The other thing they've done is they've created slideshows of interesting facts about Edinburgh, which would have been difficult to do live. So for them, there's a mix between it. I thought it was interesting that it was only 3-4 minutes long. I looked at quite a lot of them. 6 minutes might be the longest, might be 2 or 3 minutes. So in fact, a couple of things. Number one, that is contrary to Facebook's best practice, who would recommend you go streaming for 20 minutes. These guys aren't. And actually, let me give you another thing. Shh, don't tell them I said this. Peter's organisation would go mad if the videos that were produced by his organisation for live streaming were like these guys. Production values were not great at all. Sorry, Edinburgh Live, but you need to have a tripod or a stabiliser and a decent mic, because actually it was just too wobbly. Yet people are interacting with them. And here's the big thing. If you do something like this, I'm guessing that organisation has a link with a Facebook ads manager person, an account manager over on Facebook. Clearly, Facebook wants to be very aligned to news, and they've obviously got some big things going on in terms of how they're supporting smaller news organizations in the US that were announced recently. But what I thought was really interesting is, for what is effectively a very small page, doing video that actually probably anybody who's creating live video and you're watching this show, you wouldn't be publishing content like that because the production qualities are not brilliant. And yet, what's happened? They get coverage by Facebook. Methinks that will get them even more interest by other people. How could you use that approach? How could you do something that actually is so interesting that it gets other people to be wanting to write about it? That could be Facebook's blog for the media, but it equally could be other organizations. By taking a little bit of risk, perhaps doing first mover advantage in terms of an approach or in a sector, or doing something a little bit different. All the things they're doing is, we've talked about this for years. It's not new stuff, but they actually had an interesting story you can tell, and also that gave a really good case study for other people to be inspired by. I wonder how many more people are going to be following their page or watching their videos now, having had that lovely little burst of publicity from the Facebook media blog.
Really intriguing, doesn't it? Sounds good. Getting back to basics, going out onto the street, talking to people, covering stories. And of course, it's really good when you've got such a compact but vibrant city like Edinburgh that you can do something like that. And also, I'm guessing that going against the grain to have shorter videos, but more often, and therefore more of them as well, gives the impression that lots of things are happening. And actually, a viewer might think, well, you know what, I am going to watch this because it's only 4 or 5 minutes. It's not 40 or 50 minutes. So therefore, it's a good investment of my time. I think that's really interesting.
I think, Peter, also the fact not just that it's a news organisation, that same approach can be taken in terms of all the things we've talked about, is if you're looking to market a destination. Let's go back to, the council in Clarksville. They're probably trying to market why you should do business in Clarksville or why you should have a conference there. So even if you're a local government organisation, you do destination marketing, you could take that same approach. If you're a tourism organisation and you're trying to promote why you should go to, I don't know, let's pick a place, I don't know, Killarney. It's a beautiful place anyway, but why should you travel to Killarney? The local tourism office, or actually you could collaborate with a number of people, couldn't you? It could be a number of the bed and breakfasts and the hotels and the food places. You don't even have to do it yourself. You actually can, bring in other people, bring in the community to give people a sense of actually why they should actually come to Killarney, why it's a great place to come for a vacation. So I think the ideas behind it can be applied to so many situations.
And not necessarily holidays or vacations, but as we've spoken about before, a couple of 3 times, estate agents, real estate agents actually selling a town or a borough or a city as a fantastic place to come and live, and actually talking about the vibrancy and what is happening and the new development, or how great the schools are, or how the beach is so close, and those kinds of things as well. And I'm really surprised that estate agents haven't really got into this, because they, as an independent source away from a council or a tourist organisation or something like that, which could be seen as quite official, they could own that space, couldn't they? Because an estate agency business in say Edinburgh, as we were talking about Edinburgh, some of the big chains, they've probably got 5 or 6 different offices citywide. So to own that city and to employ a couple of people that can go around and can be promoting the city in that regard as a great place to live, for the culture, to bring up your kids, for your leisure, for your work, the developments that are going on. I'm just so surprised. We've spoken about this before, why they're not owning that kind of marketing space.
Because they're not doing much content marketing generally. They're doing selling, and therefore it's a huge cultural change. But lots of opportunities. We hope that's inspired you. If you were in any of those spaces and this kind of all these stories today have inspired you, then let us know. And if you've got questions, then feel free to reach out to us. Peter, let's have you wrap up the show.
There's an estate agent which is about 200 yards in that direction from where I'm sitting at the moment. And soon after Periscope was launched, I went in and I spoke to the manager and said, look, I could be doing live streams around some of the big, nice houses that you're trying to sell. That, we could put aside a Saturday a day. We could go around, we could do half a dozen in a day and really promote and get interest. And you know what his answer was? This was about 2.5 years ago. His answer was, no, it's fine, thanks. We have someone that goes around and does photographs. Like every other estate agent business in the world. And he thought that was fine. But as you say, the amount of marketing estate agents do, I think, is pretty much limited to the people who are already interested in coming to that borough and approaching them and putting things through my letterbox about 5 times a week. Thank you for joining us. Go straight in the recycling. We talked about the trivia and the game show space. We talked about the latest numbers on Twitch. We talked about some fantastic case studies from the US of A, from Clarksville. Must take the last train to there. And also north of the border from where I'm sitting, some interesting work which is going on as far as live streaming goes in Scotland, in the fantastic city of Edinburgh. So boy, oh boy, we've covered a lot of ground, and hopefully a lot of that was of interest to you as well. Thank you for watching, whether it's live or pre-recorded as you're watching right now. Don't forget to leave a comment underneath, and also this is where you'll find links to all of the articles that we mentioned as well. And we'll see you in another 7 days to talk more about live streaming in what will be episode 167. Can you believe it? See you later. Take care. Bye-bye for now.